Mhm. Well, here we are back again, shades of life. Um, I'm sitting in the shades of Kathy's kitchen at the moment, as I'm in Nova Scotia, and we're here for a busy week of writing and time together and a little bit of family time and so on. And happy to be here with Tennyson joining us in our shared space. Um, We've just spent the past 2 days writing a chapter for a program that really is called, the chapter is called Leading Self, but the core of it centers around the notion of knowing self, and that self-awareness is critical to leading in whatever capacity you want to step forward in leading. And it's been a real interesting exploration for us. First off, to write a lot more than just saying knowing yourself is important. Well, what does that all mean? And equally, how do you get there? What's that journey to really knowing oneself, and what does that mean? And our writing is not personalized to either of us. It's it's so, but it for me, on the more personal sense, it was quite a journey to really understand myself in order to come to, like, the word I'm going to use is manage myself. To know um my emotional responses to things, my intellectual responses to things, to be in good personal space, which has made me, I feel, a better um art of hosting practitioner and trainer, or just in a more general sense, a better father, a better friend and colleague. But it it takes a long time to get out of ego and into just self-awareness. And that's been kind of the fun and the delight of the past couple of days, just to think about it, to express it without talking about it in a personal sense. Yeah. So drop that out there.
Okay, let's play. Because I mean, I like it when we toss something out and then riff it, improv it. So maybe what I'm speaking to initially is a round of like the first layer riffs that happened for me. And I make the assumption, maybe this is part of knowing myself. I live with the assumption that it's all connected and it's all got something in it. Uh, Oh, yeah. And I'm trying to bring some coherence to all of that. I think knowing self, okay, so I got to make it all personal. Knowing myself uh, feels like it is an ongoing thing. I don't think I think I can know big and important chunks of myself, but I don't know all of myself. Holy shit. I feel like that, that is the process of encountering life and recognizing some things that surprise and some things that maybe offend and some things that animate. So I've got to name something there. Uh, yeah, and then I'm going to follow the heart of it here. I have a picture on my desk here. Let's see, I guess because we can see each other, I can raise it up a little bit. There's nine people in this photo, and it was taken in 1954. And the
Wow.
woman over here on the bottom, whatever that is my grandmother. That's my dad's mother, Lena Ross.
Mm.
And this man in the middle is my great grandfather, Grandpa Stewart. And then it's all the siblings that were part of that family. So I think my grandma was the second oldest in that one. And I have a cousin. Ah, interesting. I have a cousin. I think she's 82, And she reached out to me because of a Facebook connection.
Hmm.
And she's a person who lives in California. Her name is Kate. And Kate was like kind of exploring family and patterns. She's a sort of working her way out of work therapist. And she's been a person who's been naturally interested in those things. She and I have met monthly for the last 5 months in the spirit of, well, we're kind of family. So, you want to get to talk a little bit. She sent me this picture, and I find myself staring at this picture a lot. My grandma Lena was really important to me. And in 1954, I think, if I've got it close enough, she's about a 34-year-old.
Hmm.
And she's also got 4 kids, and she was probably near or already divorced from the man that she married, my biological grandfather. The one that I grew up with was my adopted step grandpa. Something about that photo has me thinking about it. I have the photo because one of the brothers in that actually died recently within the last couple of weeks. And I didn't even think about that layer of family very much because my grandmother, Lena, in that photo, she died in 2009. And it's not a layer of family that I've been really close to, but oh, nice cat. Way to go.
Has to come
Uh,
for a bit.
but I find myself thinking about when it comes to knowing self, there's something about knowing the patterns that I come from. And what an opportunity it's been with this distant cousin, whatever, Kate person, to be able to meet and actually have that conversation of patterns in this case, it's the Stewart line, and naming things like addiction is one of the patterns that lives in the family system. Um, some rage and some has been part of the family system. And it's been really intriguing, joyful, I think, also for me to be speaking with someone who can speak some of that language and speak some of that curiosity. So maybe there's a layer there, like one of the layers, know thyself. One of the layers is, what does it mean for me to be a wolf? And what does it mean for me to come from this Stuart lineage or some of the other lineages that are apparent? Um, well, maybe that's enough for right now. I'll stop there.
I do have to chuckle because what does it mean for you to be a wolf? Recognizing that is your last name, but it does conjure up the image of the animal. So little smile there. So know thyself. I think that, one of the things that we write about or trying to write about is the fact that it is a journey, and that the more we know who we are, the more consistent we can be in all areas of our life, whether that's personal or professional or social.
Hmm.
And that sometime a long time ago, I heard that was like the definition of authentic, or the embodiment of authentic is when you show up as the same person no matter what environment you're showing up in. And so I think about that quite a bit, actually.
Hmm.
And so I know that we're writing that piece into the work um, that we're doing. And I mean, we've all been around for a while, so like we know it is a lifelong journey, and
Hmm.
that different experiences and different assessments and things like that will show us a little bit of who we are. And part of the question becomes, well, what do we do with what we see and become aware of, and how willing are we to really be in that journey in the know thyself related to living and or leadership? How willing are we to accept responsibility for that which is ours to be accountable for or responsible for? And then for me, part of that whole journey for self-awareness is also knowing what I'm not accountable for or responsible for, particularly as it relates to somebody else, and whatever challenges that they might have. My journey is my journey, your journey, their journey is their journey. So doesn't mean we're not in each other's journeys, because obviously we are. But what is the where are the boundaries around that? And I think that's also part of knowing thyself, is kind of knowing where your boundaries are and um, what you'll stand for, what you're willing to let go isn't even quite the right word. I want to say what you're willing to let in, like what you're willing to take. And where does that show up in terms of boundaries and whatnot? So I have a little bit of that kind of showing up. And then I have a very convoluted family history. And this question of that lineage and what does that mean is really interesting. And then family patterns that show up within people who never even knew each other is also kind of interesting to me. But then I go back to what does that mean to me? Like, what's the relevance of that? And what am I learning, or am I willing to learn from all of that? And I just think that there's parts of the journey that we need to grow into, or grow able to do, or skilled enough to do, or um, whatever the case may be around that. So I'll just stop there for the moment.
It's interesting for me, this sort of veer into lineage a bit, because it's something that's been on my mind um, for the past few years. Um, so I'll begin by saying my mother and I always had a very challenged relationship. Um, if I'd call home, she'd hand the phone to my dad, kind of thing. Or if he was outside, your dad's outside, call back. Yeah. But in after my dad died, my mom moved to Fargo, and so she was nearby, and she was dealing with Alzheimer's. And so once a week, I'd go in town and take her driving. She loved to go driving. We could drive for an hour. She just loved to see whatever. And she would tell stories about her growing up. And that helped me learn about my family history some, but learn a whole lot more about her worldview, and help me understand her more. And it helped build a bond between us that hadn't been there before. Because my mother's parents, my grandparents on my mother's side and my father's side, were a big part of my lives. Um, and had significant influence. And I've often reflected on that, their influence on my life. And sometimes I'll be doing something and I'll go, oh, that's just how Grandpa Gordon would do it. That's just how Grandpa Nago would do it. Isn't that interesting? Which leads me then to like the notion of what influence have I had on my daughter that's reflected in my grandchildren? And what can I contribute to my grandchildren's awareness of how I came to see the world and experience it, and their parents came to see the world and experience it, and what it means for them at some point in time. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that um, looking backward for me, it's a very important exploration. Looking forward to my grandchildren, um, I'm still trying to sort out what that all kind of means in a way. Yeah. How can I, what's the journey to be important to them? And I know I'm important to them. I'm not downplaying that at all. We spend a lot of time together. But what am I bringing to them? That's affecting their worldview, and what can I bring for awareness about that? I guess that's if that question makes any sense. But it's been on my mind lately, this grandparent grandkid relationship, and helping me be better self-aware. I think also then, as I said earlier, makes me a better, not just a better parent, but a better grandparent. So I'll end there.
Okay, I'll try to play from there. New grandfather. My granddaughter Elba is 7-ish months old now, so I'm just anticipating that kind of future and hoping for sweetness actually as a grandfather with granddaughter. It does help have me thinking a bit, Jerry, also about, what are the qualities that maybe came a little bit from me that live in my children. And then I'm going to link it back to the grandma that I was showing in that picture because there is a connection there. One of the things that I hope to hope to install in my kids, was this belief that there's always another way.
Mm.
And we have some stories that go back to where that little basic sentence landed as a value and landed as a belief, and I'm really glad for that. I think I got some of that from my grandmother. Well, probably both of my grandmothers. And I'm thinking of my mom's grandma, Fern, also, or my mom's mother, my grandma on that side, Fern. But there was something about, there's always another way. There's something about curiosity. There's something about, there's a bigger story here. And um, interesting. I think it has been part of my journey to recognize how strong that value is in me. And when I get into circumstances where that doesn't seem to be the value, like this is the way we do things, how itchy I get. And I can get,
Mhm.
pretty itchy pretty fast. When I try to nuance some of this, I feel like we're in a giant topic. So I'm trying to nuance a few little parts of it here. Part of knowing myself, part of the journey that I've experienced, continue to experience really, in knowing myself is, can I know myself for my gifts also? And I
Mhm.
like that as a question with others, right? It's like, well, okay, I imagine you're 1,000 things, but what are some of the gifts that you bring, or witnessing back or reflecting back some of the gifts that people bring? So I think that feels like an important chunk of, am I able to have some literacy about who I am and who I choose to be or claim to be. A flip side of that also feels like, do I have some ability to know what scares me or what I'm afraid of or what I'm embarrassed by or ashamed of? That's a pretty big category in that also, or a pretty important category. It feels like when yeah, well, I'm just going to say that's part of it. And then one of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, as I try to translate some, ideas into exercises, is I'm playing with these questions that I ask a lot around what has your attention. And by looking at the question of what has your attention, just human beings talking with one another, what has your attention? That usually what has our attention provides some insight or some medicine or some guidance into who are you as a human. So I use sometimes a simple example of, outside the window here, I can see daffodils growing and they have my attention. And they have my attention in part because they're just beautiful. And I long for a relationship with beauty, or I long to do things that are beautiful or contribute some beauty in the world. So I'm really interested in such a big notion of how do any of us come to know ourselves? What if the starting point were, well, just start with what has your attention and be willing to explore that a little bit with the maybe some of the boundaries of that might have something to do with who you long to be or who you wish to be or who you're afraid of not being for that matter. Those are some of the things that come into that question when I play with it.
Lots of touch points. I like that there's always another way. But I really like, can I know myself from my gifts also? And I like that, do I have the ability to know what I'm afraid of or ashamed about? And I think that these are really interesting questions. I think the gifts question is um a challenge for a lot of people because there's the question of how do I own my gifts and stay in a place of humility and not go to a place of ego because I'm really good at something.
Right.
Um, And then the other side of that is I'm so good at something that I don't even recognize it as a gift because
Mhm.
it's just what I do. And so to be able to accept that when someone offers it um, as a gift is, I think, really important, and to own it. I remember when my last marriage was failing and we had been working together, and then I was working a lot more on my own. One of the things that happened was there were a number of really successful engagements that I had hosted or facilitated. And at some point during this reflection piece, I went, I can't, like, I did that. And I
Mhm.
can't say we did it or it was a team or it was me leading those engagements. And to be able to just own that was, I think, a powerful moment in my journey to go, yep, that was me. I did that. Um, and I think shame is it's almost like the opposite, a different element of the spectrum. I was going to say opposite. I don't want to deal in false dichotomies here, but um, and shame has the ability to really shut us down and disconnect us, not just from ourselves, but from other people. And so I find that to talk about things that um, where we have felt shame
Mhm.
shines the light on it and then disperses the stigma that's associated with that. And I know I experienced some of that around my first divorce and job loss, and um, the stories that I made up about myself in that were really
Mhm.
damaging stories, I guess I would say. And then to be able to share some of that with someone else who was like, oh, well, yes, it's understandable that you reacted this way or that this happened or whatever, kind of go, oh, taking it out of the dark and shining some light on it changes the nature of how I can relate to my own stories around that. And I think sometimes, and Jerry and I have done a pretty good job of when we're writing to talk about what doesn't work or hasn't worked as well as what has worked, and it gives people permission to recognize that they also make mistakes. And another way that I look at that and deal with that is if I look at colleagues who we know have sometimes had a misstep somewhere along the way. They're still out there. They're still doing work. They're still, like, people still really like and respect them. So one misstep along the way is not as damaging as we might think it is unless we hold on to it within
Mhm.
ourselves.
Mhm.
So when we come back to the know thyself, I think it's also know where and how we can, I want to say work with, that's not quite right. Who are our people? Where are our circles of support? That could be friends and colleagues, it could be therapists, it could be who knows how that shows up. But to have ways, could be a coach or a mentor,
Mhm.
uh, to have ways of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and have that vulnerability rewarded with respect.
Mhm.
I'll stop there. It was a lot.
Mhm. Well, since we're sort of free forming, wander, I'll wander us in a slightly different direction because it just sort of emerged in here listening to the two of you. In that, what I've described and what I feel like all three of us have described are mostly things where we've had some form of direct experience. Family members, um, spouses, kids, grandkids, they're sort of, but what about those things that might influence who we are that don't come from that form of direct experience? So, Janice, I know you were just in France recently. And when I go to Paris, I have the enormous sense every time of coming home.
Huh.
And And I actually have, this is the not direct, I actually believe, sense that I have a past life there.
Hmm.
I was a soldier. I was a Templar soldier. I was stabbed in the back by a spear, and the how I became aware of that is I was getting a massage, and the massage therapist touched a spot on my back, and the whole awareness exploded in me. I saw myself, I felt the stab, I felt everything, and that helped me begin to understand why I feel so at home the moment I land. And it's just like, oh, I'm here. You know, and I'm completely comfortable there. I've always been completely comfortable there. Wandering, sitting, being. And so that's part of who I am. And what else is out there that's not direct experience in the way I'm thinking of you? You talk to your grandparents, you talk to, that has somewhere in some process form impacted who we are as people. Um, um, yeah, you know, there are other things I could say, but there's that little thing there that um, what else in history um, uh, that's not immediately visible to us
Right.
is
So not
within us enough to impact who we are.
not immediately visible does not mean not direct experience. I think the distinction that you've made here is experience in relationship with others and experience in relationship with yourself. Because many people would definitely say that was a direct experience.
Mhm.
And you know, anybody who knows any little bit about me knows I've had tons of those kinds of experiences. I would definitely call them direct experiences. But where I went in my mind in equating it is we come to know ourselves in meditation. That's a
Hmm.
direct experience, but it's in relationship with ourselves or in reflective journaling or any other ways. So I like that you've kind of opened this up into a broader conversation than just what we experience with other people, because this relationship with self um, is fueled in so many different ways.
Oh, oodles of ways of knowing self. So I think one of my primary modes of living is that there's always more. And the only qualifier that I want to put on that is I don't want to speak there's always more in some strictly quantified way. To me, it's more like, oh, rearrange the parts and you've got something different, or, so there's always more. And I realize that that feeds into like how I want to exist in a lot of the relationships that I have, and I'll bring it back to sweetheart relationship here with Dana. When I'm asking questions like how are you today and who are you today, I really mean it. Like what's changed in you overnight, or what's changed in you because you were at work today? And I think I see those as like always there's fluidity in all of that. There's always some moving aspect of that. And I so relate to there's always reveals like there's never a shortage of that. Like, are you kidding? This is a complex universe and we're these tiny little dots. And yet within these tiny dots are really complex universes also. So I think there's just a whole lot there. I have benefited slash appreciated being around people who have some ability to narrate categories of themselves. So I'm thinking of a pastor dude that I worked with earlier in the year who's a real think out loud kind of guy. He's maybe mid 40s-ish or so. And he's a real think out loud kind of guy. And I always loved it when he would say, I'm the kind of guy that's sort of a big ideas guy, and I love to think at the 30,000 foot layer and, put me into the details and I'm just going to forget most of them. I thought it was just refreshing to hear him say that, probably in part because I have been reluctant to claim such things about myself.
Mm.
I can go at the 30,000 foot layer and I love to create ideas and connect them together, but something in me has resisted calling it. I love the way that he did that. So there's something about the category. And then maybe the other thing that I'm adding in here is know thyself. That's where we started, Jerry, as you were framing it. And the part of me that can't not nuance. What the hell does it mean to know self, right? The part of me that, so I guess I'm in a category of one of those people that just needs to nuance things, right? The reframing for me comes into know thyself, be curious about thyself,
Mm.
be curious about self, because maybe it's not about knowing, but just about, having some curious capacity. Oh, I wonder what's going on there. I wonder what, all of that kind of stuff. And then maybe the further nuance underneath that, these are like codes. The third layer code to me is, can I be in relationship with the nuance of who I am today, and what stays the same in me and what changes regularly in me. All of those feel like invitations into knowing self. And maybe the landing it back for me, I think that's somewhere in the root of all of this is um, we, oh gosh, what's the we here? I don't know. We human beings, we facilitators, I don't know what it is. We put a lot of attention on things out there. I'm going to call it at the human layer. It is a pretty strong human tendency to put attention on things external. And I think part of what we're exploring here is that how and who we are in the internal has a whole lot to do with what we even see and encounter on the external. To me, that's part of, well, why would you ever want to know yourself? Well, turns out, this instrument is rather biased and influenced. If I come to develop curiosity about this, then it might just change what I see out there also. I mean, I think that's a pretty strong premise in a lot of facilitative work, right? I don't have some grand conclusion to that other than just saying that.
Well, it won't surprise you to learn that we are writing a fair bit about curiosity as we talk about,
I bet you are.
worldview explorations and whatnot. And I think everything that you just said, Tennyson, is really what we're aiming for, right? Which is that, what's that phrase we always come back to with the art of hosting, which is something to do with the interior condition
The
of the,
success of the intervention is dependent on the
right,
interior condition of the intervener.
Yeah.
right,
It was
exactly.
Bill O'Brien, I think, was the.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing, Tennyson, when you were talking, I saw a meme or something that says, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop."
In a drop. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for that.
It is. So I'll come back just to the practical, maybe, and towards the end here. And if that's where we are, and the importance of knowing oneself. And this is something I personally deal with all the time, and have been in conversations about. Is I had a early in my career, in my professional career, I had an experience around the issue of loyalty, and I failed in being loyal to coworkers, um, and badly. And that was a profound learning for me in the importance of loyalty to employees, coworkers, and it's affected my thinking ever since on everything. And so I'm a little bit sort of on the too far edge of loyalty kind of thing, and I have to manage that. And I know I have to manage it. And Kathy will point it out to me once in a while. But it without that awareness, I would probably find myself in being unproductive in relationships, being demanding in relationships, being um, judgmental instead of curious. You know, I still get judgmental, so I'm not perfect here anyway. But you know, this is a 50-year ago, 40 some year ago experience
Mm.
that's impacted me throughout all of the remainder of my professional career. And it's also a blind spot for me
Mm.
because I have an expectation people will be loyal. And then I missed that. So it's both a demand and an expectation and thirdly a blind spot, but it is. So there's one clear sort of
Mm.
direct know myself experience.
And an assumption about what loyalty means, and that other
Right.
What?
other people would define it the same way.
Um, I think you've invited a kind of tucking it in round. Is that right, Jerry?
Seems right to me.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, it
Yeah.
seems right to me too. So I think what I'm trying to find right now is one of the things that's kind of stirring and bubbling in this bigger conversation. If I go back to this photo, which is enthralling me, and my grandma on that bottom corner over here, Grandma Lena. In some ways, it went when the invitation is to know self. Aside from all the nuancing I've already talked about, I need to give myself permission to be partial. And in a partial way with this, it's like it gives me permission to say, well, one thing that I am is I'm my grandmother's grandson. And my grandmother happened to be a pretty curious person, and she happened to be a pretty, a pretty broad thinker. And I love that about her, and I love that some dimension of that lives within me. I think I think I've been learning and struggling and fumbling probably most of my life with the question, with the confidence to name myself without apology or name myself inclusive of the shames and disloyalties and things like that that are also part of my experience and journey. But I really love the invitation to say, okay, cool. We know that you're a billion things, but let's just choose three to focus on right now. And even attentiveness to the three actually brings some more relationship with maybe more than that. That feels inviting to me. So I appreciate that. Context as we always have to explore and fumble around with some ideas a little bit. That's a bit of what I get for today. Thanks for today.
Well, I would say the thing that's bubbling up in me, or that I'm curious about, is Jerry started this by saying we've been struggling with writing this particular chapter of this program,
Hmm.
and it's been a difficult one to write, and it's been so easy to talk about it. And it's something that is near and dear to our hearts and our own
Yeah,
journey. So like, why has this been so hard to write? And
interesting.
I think part of it is because it's the first of 12 chapters in a workshop,
Uh,
and we have very specific framing around it, which is how does knowing thyself help you be a better leader of a strategic workplace culture initiative? And so there's a little bit of that, and we're not wanting to be repetitive of things that we know are going to show up in later chapters. So I'm just musing a little bit about, well, this was interesting and fun, and it kind of went where it wanted to go. And yeah, so much more fun than writing the chapter was. Although now that it's done, it's actually a pretty decent piece of work. So,
Sweet.
yep. All righty.
You got closing words there, Jerry?
Oh, isn't it so much more fun though to talk about yourself and knowing yourself? So it's one of the things that makes the writing hard is we can't talk about ourselves, and um, so it's challenging not to personalize it to our own experiences. But yeah, it is lovely conversation. I love where we went, all the places we journeyed into.
Ah, cool. All right. Love you guys. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Love you too. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Be well.